Hello, I'm Charles Moffat, and today, two things. Number one, good news. I have, as of today, reached 200 subscribers on my YouTube channel. So, I am doing a book giveaway. This book. Everybody who comments on this video and sends me a message on Instagram will be eligible to be in a draw to win a copy of this book. Okay, so all you have to do is post a comment on this video, send me a message on Instagram, you're automatically put in the draw, okay? And I think by, not this week, yeah, maybe 2 weeks from now, I will do the draw and then we'll find out who won, okay? So, in the meantime, I'm gonna do a little bit of a reading here. So actually read part of this book. Okay. Okay. The Exorcist Dagger. Chapter 1. A pair of rats, one gray and one black, scurried from the shadows of an alleyway and into the light of the cobblestone street to snatch a piece of fallen bread. The hooves of horses and wagon wheels went by, but the rats navigated these dangers deftly. An orange tabby cat observed their progress, but did not intervene. A tiny steel crossbow made a sound, and the black rat tumbled over the cobblestones, a dart-sized crossbow bolt. With gray goose fletching in its ribs. The gray rat froze. He was older, and he sensed now that he was in danger, not from the horses or the wagons, but from an unseen predator, man. After a moment, he scurried onwards, faster, grabbed the bread, and began his journey back to the alleyway. The exterminator grunted briefly as he reloaded his hand crossbow. He took aim, but couldn't get a clear shot at the gray rat as it scurried around wagon wheels and behind the hooves of a mule hauling a cart of iron ore. "He's going to get away," muttered one of the men, observing the exterminator, an elderly man with gray hair, sipping vodka from a glass flask. "2 coppers says he won't," said another man, younger and very skinny, gangly even. "You're on." The exterminator took several steps into the busy street, avoiding carts and wagons, and took aim. He timed his shot toward the entrance of the alleyway. Click! The wee crossbow bolt flew past the rat. The gray fletching, brushing its tail, skittered across the cobblestones and thudded into an empty crate at the entrance to the alleyway. "Told you so," said the elderly gambler, collecting his winnings from his fellow. Yeah, you win some, you lose some." The exterminator went the rest of the way across the street and retrieved his crossbow bolt, wrenching it free from the wooden crate and examining it for damage. On the way back, he retrieved the dead rat and his other bolt, and upon his return, tossed the dead rat into a basket with others. "You two distracted me while I was working," he snarled. "Oh, I thought you were a professional." "Do professionals get distracted so easily?" asked the older gambler. He smiled and downed a sip of vodka from his flask. "What is your name, old man?" The second gambler, sensing a fight, decided to back away and seek other opportunities for amusement elsewhere. The old gambler smiled again, his face wrinkling. He had a plain face, like a farmer, but skinnier and haggard-looking. He had not spent a lifetime toiling in the dirt and building up a layer of muscle and fat like many farmers did, as well as the tanned face and skin that in older farmers looked like red shoe leather. No, this man was pale, like a city dweller or a temple acolyte. except there was nothing holy about this man's appearance. He was carrying 3 daggers on his belt, 2 steel, and 1 crafted from obsidian, which was either just for show, or it was magical. The old man was fingering the hilt of the obsidian dagger. "My name is Piotr, and I don't like the tone of your voice. You should learn to respect your elders." He said it quietly, barely above a whisper. The exterminator backed off and rubbed his unkempt beard with the back of his left hand. He holstered his uncocked crossbow, picked up his basket of dead rats, and walked away, grumbling. "That was interesting," muttered the second gambler, returning from around a corner shop. "Are you trying to get into a fight, Master Piotr?" Piotr scoffed, but said nothing, relaxing and stretching his suddenly tense neck. He hadn't noticed during the confrontation, but now his hands were shaking. He took a sip of vodka from his flask to help calm down. "He was just looking for someone to blame for his failure," muttered Piotr, walking around a corner and heading north towards a wealthier part of Kazark. As mining towns go, Kazark was a profitable one, bustling with industry. Any time of day, one can hear the distant clanging of hammers on steel from the forges and smithies at the south end of the town, closer to where the poor people lived, and worked close to the smithies and smelters. The further north a person went, and they entered the wealthy neighborhoods, where the distant clanging dwindled to the sound of crickets, and eventually were barely audible. Instead, a person would hear the temple bells every hour on the hour, so that people knew when to come to pray. Not that Piotr was the praying type. He and his young apprentice, Grigory, were more of the roguish type. Piotr himself was retired, but he had opted to take on an apprentice because it suited his needs at the moment. Having a younger man to carry his things, take the fall, to be used as a distraction, or even just to scare off street thugs, was quite useful, although so far the younger man had proved himself to be quite cowardly. Couldn't even stand up to a lowly rat exterminator. Piotr sighed, keeping his thoughts to himself. "If we keep going this way, we will be near the north gate," muttered Grigory, perhaps conscious that this was the direction his master was headed, and having realized there are advantages to such action. Old habits die hard. A drunk merchant veered into the path, a coin purse heavy on his belt, brandishing a half-full tankard of ale. Without missing a step, Piotr stopped to help and steady the man. "Be careful. These cobblestones are slippery when wet, and it is going to rain again soon." Piotr pointed upwards at the dark clouds coming from the north. The merchant's gaze followed his hand skyward. "Yep, gonna rain. You were right about that," slurred the merchant. "You should get somewhere warm and dry," suggested Piotr, his voice stern. He tossed something behind his back to his apprentice. The merchant nodded and wandered south, but now with some more determination in his step. "Don't count it here," Piotr said with a glance. "Wait until after we leave the north gate." "Are we going to the graveyard again?" "Yes, but for 2 reasons this time." They continued northward, but when Piotr saw a tall, bearded man grooming a horse, while bored stable boys watched, he suddenly pulled his hood up over his head and veered to the west side of the street to avoid being noticed by the broad, muscular man. Hrothgar. What the heck is he doing here? Piotr started thinking of a myriad of different reasons, the most obvious and paranoid of which was the obsidian dagger on his belt. He doubted that the big, hairy barbarian was looking for him, but he didn't want to tempt fate either. He had stolen the dagger from Hrothgar back during the winter. when they had both been staying at the same inn, believing it could be magical, but he had yet to discern the dagger's properties, or if it was even magical. Doubtlessly, he would want it back. Pyotr ducked into an alleyway, and his apprentice Grigory followed closely behind. After a deep breath, he rearranged a few wooden crates that had been left in the alleyway, and then observed the barbarian from the holes between the wooden crate slats in the crates. "He doesn't look like he has a lot of gold on him," remarked Grigory. "Is he a knight?" "Just because he is wearing shiny new plate mail, that doesn't make him a knight," replied Pyotr. "And no, he isn't a mark. He is a friend. But he is a friend I would rather not bump into right now." "You stole from him?" Pyotr didn't answer, keeping both eyes on Hrothgar. The big barbarian finished grooming his horse and finally let the stable boys take the stallion into the stables. He sat down on a bench near the southwest corner of the Hunter's Haven Inn, an older establishment, which at one point must have catered to hunters and trappers, but had since changed its clientele to merchants and travelers, keeping the name in the process and much of its decor being upscaled over time. The barbarian looked even bigger than Pyotr remembered. The last time he had seen Hrothgar, he had been wearing a combination of fur and leather hides for armor, but had since apparently done well for himself financially and invested in some plate mail, which made him look even bigger. It wasn't the full-body plate mail that lords and barons could afford, but it was steel plates covering most of the warrior's vital areas. Hrothgar had shed most of his leather and fur clothing. It had been very hot lately, and the summer solstice festival was starting tomorrow. Most people these days would be shedding clothing in the oppressive heat. Today was an exception. It had been raining on and off since last night, bringing much-needed relief to the mining town. His helmet, however, was unmistakable. A big helmet that covered most of his head except his face, with a nose piece down the middle, and antlers that made the barbarian seem even taller. His choice of weapons were no less impressive. A yew longbow, a great massive sword that measured at least 6 feet long, and the bearded axe Hrothgar had previously kept tucked into his belt, but now had a harness for easier carrying. Excuse me. I'm gonna burp here. Okay, he's come into some money by the looks of things. He was much poorer when I last saw him. Are we going to rob him? Pyotr glanced at his apprentice in irritation. No, we leave him be. But now we know we need to avoid him. He's the friendly sort, but I wouldn't want to get it on his bad side. The old thief turned on his heel and started westward, through the alleyway, towards a street further to the west. Better to just avoid the other street entirely now that he knew Hrothgar was in town. When they exited the alleyway, they headed north and reached the north gate. Pyotr smiled and nodded to the guards as they passed through, even calling 2 of the guards by name and waving to them. They kept their hoods up and low over their eyes as the sky started to drip large droplets. Kazark itself was an ancient fortified town, one of many in Kurovia, which was a kingdom of crossroads between other trading nations. Kazarkian ore and steel was in high demand, both in Kurovia and outside of the kingdom. There were even rumors of a war coming, but this was idle gossip. The kings and queens of Kurovia had ruled peacefully for centuries and had no intention of invading their neighbors, and who would dare to invade Kurovia? It was a snowy and harsh region known to have monsters hiding in primordial forest and forlorn mountain ranges. The cemetery north of Kazark was nearly as big as the town itself. Ancient crumbling mausoleums were placed side by side, with barely enough room to squeeze a hand between some of them. Some even dug deeper to form catacombs in the earth and statues marking the mass graves of people killed during plagues. The graves here had been picked over many times by grave robbers, but the wealthiest dead didn't leave their valuables out in the open for anyone to steal them. They left them in mausoleums guarded by traps, often deadly, or creatures that never slept. Piotr picked one of the larger mausoleums that was built into the side of a hill, but looked smaller and less significant because most of it was buried. This was a likely candidate. The doors holding it shut were old and thick, composed of rusty iron, but were thick and sturdy. The lock was similarly rusted. There was no point in even trying to pick the lock, Piotr decided. Give me the purse. I will count it. You get out your hammer and chisel. The elderly thief pointed to the rusted hinges on the east side of the doors. Grigori stared blankly at him and then looked around to see if there were any witnesses. He could see an old woman and a young woman further to the south, who looked to be praying at one of the graves. Won't they hear us? Yes, and if they care enough to report it, by the time they had convinced the town guards to investigate, assuming they even try to do so, we will be long gone. We're just two men in the rain wearing hoods. They'll never find us. Would even be footprints thanks to the rain. Grigori shrugged and started hammering away with his chisel, while Piotr counted the gold sovereigns, silver knights, and coppers in the purse of coins, pausing only briefly to look towards the two women to the south. He could hear them distantly. I think they're chanting, mused the old thief. Grigori stopped working and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. How so? Priestesses? They don't look the type. Not exactly. I think they're exorcists. Probably worried about undead or something else, about that grave. Ah, Grigori made the crescent sign of a silver moon on his chest, like a devout choir boy, and went back to work. Piotr had noticed previously that the boy was both superstitious and cowardly. Not necessarily bad traits in a thief, but certainly ones that would prolong his lifespan in this line of work. He hadn't realized the young man was religious until now. A healthy fear of death was a good thing, in Piotr's opinion. It was why he had left that inn last winter and trekked north to Areknev. Someone had been murdering the guests at the inn, and Piotr didn't favor the idea of being next. Leaving had been logical, not cowardly, in his opinion. Still, it was good to see Hrothgar had survived the ordeal. He was one of the few people Piotr had been certain was not the killer. He still didn't know who the murderer had been, but he had heard rumors. He was half tempted to return the obsidian dagger to the barbarian, apologize for taking it, and then ask what had happened after Piotr had fled the inn. But that would mean parting with the dagger that he still suspected was magical. Obsidian daggers were notoriously brittle, like glass. But this one was crafted so perfectly, so flawlessly, and it seemed impervious to harm. It had to be magical. This was one of the things Piotr had noticed to be true. Magical weapons never rust, never dull, never break. Or at least not to his knowledge. The obsidian dagger was an enigma, however. If it possessed magical properties, it kept them well hidden. The rain became a drizzle. Lightning flashed to the northwest, and they heard the low rumbling moments later. The storm was still a few miles away. The wind began to pick up. Work quickly, lad. You've almost got it. The last of the hinges came loose, and the two men had to work together to pull the door aside and leaning it up against its counterpart. An alchemical smell caught Piotr's nostrils, and he reached out a hand to catch Grigori and pull him back away from the entrance. Something that doesn't smell right. Light a torch. In the rain? Do you want to walk into an acid trap and then light the torch after your face is melted off? No, I didn't think so. Shield the torch with your body so the rain doesn't get on it, and soak it with a little oil first. Grigori grumbled as he did what he was bade to do, not so happy that it was slow and annoying, but at the same time presumably thankful that he was learning so much from such a seasoned thief. Or at least, that is what Pyotr thought he was thinking. It was possible the young man was thinking something that was quite the opposite. When the torch was lit, Pyotr gestured towards the foreboding entrance of the mausoleum. Lean in there slowly. Don't go in with your feet just yet. Keep your eyes alert and look at everything. Try to recognize the source of the smell. Grigori did as instructed and leaned back out a moment later, looking a bit pale in the light of the torch. There's a tripwire, and the wire connects to several clay jugs at the back of the room. The smell is coming from there. At the back of the room? How far? I don't know, maybe 12 feet? That far, huh? The explosion would need to be a big one. I think it is safe. We can just step over it. Don't be foolish. That is only the first trap. What else did you see? Some urns lining the walls, old and rusted. There is a door at the far end of the room, near the pottery. There will be a second trap on the door. What is special about the door? Skinny in width. Just one, but made of iron, like these ones. But the lock looks to be steel and doesn't look rusted. Built to contain the explosion. Right. Here is what we will do. We will stand back and deliberately trigger the tripwire from a distance. The bang might attract attention, but we'll have to risk it. The two exorcists don't seem to care about us. And then you heard howling, the barking of a dog in the distance. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I haven't met any exorcists before, but I have heard they are a dishonorable bunch. Charlatans half the time. No better than fortune tellers. The real danger is if the explosion is loud enough, the town guards hear and send someone to investigate. So we need to trigger the tripwire, get inside once the smoke clears, and then try to get past the second door. I will do the lock picking, since we will be pressed for time. Won't there be a lot of dust, too, from the urns and all the ashes? Yes. You may need to close your eyes when we go in there. Wait until we are in the chamber behind the second door before opening your eyes. But what if there's another trap? There might be one. That's true. But we will need to move quickly. Sometimes we do have to take a few risks in this line of work. Most likely the last trap will be on the coffin itself, though. So I wouldn't worry about the two traps on the same door. Sorry, about two traps on the same door. Lastly, the last trap might be a magical sigil. It gets triggered when you look at it too closely. So keep your eyes on the floor and stand well back until we inspect it. Understood? Grigori nodded, his face dripping from the rain despite trying to keep most of it off his face with his hood. His old hood had a few moth-sized holes in it and badly needed some repairs. Good. Now we stand back near those tombstones, and you're going to throw rocks at the tripwire until you hit it. The tombstones should protect us from the explosion. The two thieves retreated from the marble tombstones. Retreated behind the marble tombstones, further south of the mausoleum, and Grigori reached down and hefted a fist-sized rock. A feminine scream sounded to the south, from the direction of the two women. Pyotr looked up and saw that they were no longer as alone as they thought they were. Stay down, he hissed to his apprentice. One of the women, the older of the two, was on the ground, and there was now a man standing over her carrying a wicked-looking spiked mace. He was wearing red robes with a black circle around a crimson moon on his chest. Two men wearing armor and carrying crossbows were chasing the second woman north around a row of mausoleums towards Grigori and Piotr. They were struggling to wind the windlass cranks on the rear of the crossbows without falling too far behind the woman. Bloody